Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Ashley Bennett. I am the Director of Special Education Advocacy for Altman Law, and my Assistant Director, Nora Schumann, and I will be presenting for you this evening on IEP transition plans. First, I would just like to take a minute to thank you all for joining us. We're excited to explore this topic that we feel is pretty necessary for parents heading into IEP meetings, knowing that it's not too early to start thinking about transitioning your child to whatever their next step is. Before we get started, I want to point out that if you have questions during the presentation, please go into the Q&A tab up top. And if you click on that, you can post your questions there, and a couple of our advocates will be watching during the presentation and making sure that all of your questions get answered one way or another. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And before we get into the material, I would just like to kind of share a little bit about our firm and who we are. We are a national law firm, so we have clients all over the country. And we offer legal representation in four primary practice areas, which are student defense, special education, Title IX, and civil rights. So those are our main source of practice. Our commitment to justice knows no bounds, and we will do our best to secure a favorable outcome for your child. And I apologize if I tend to look away sometime during the presentation. If you guys can see me, I have another screen over here, so that's where I'm looking. Just to introduce a little bit of our team to everybody. I am the director, like I said, and I've been with the firm since January of 2023. I have about 30 years of experience in the field of special education, both as a teacher and a school administrator, and most recently here with Altman Law as I help to advocate for our families. Nora, who is my assistant director, she also has well over 25 years of experience in the field of special education, both as a teacher and an administrator, and she has been with the firm almost since the beginning. Sarah is one of our advocates, and she lives in Texas, but she is from the state of New Jersey, and she also has a wealth of experience in the field of special education, and she also has been a child development specialist in her past. So she is now with the firm advocating for families. We have Bobby Congdon. Bobby is a graduate of Texas Tech University. She has a master's in education and an emphasis in special education. Bobby is a diagnostician by trade, so her wealth of information is huge and helpful with our firm as we look into students' eligibility and finding areas in which they qualify for services. So Bobby is very, what's the word, crucial to our team. And our last advocate is Eric Counts. He also has over 25 years of experience, and he is also very well versed in the field of special education, especially special education policy. And he is also an adjunct math professor. And he also contracts with the Maryland State Department of Education as a member of the expert review team. So together, our department has well over, I'm sad to say, 100 years of experience in the field of special education. Okay. So let's get into what is a transition plan. Some of you may or may not ever heard that term before. If you've got little children, then you may have not ever had to talk about a transition plan. And as your children get on in middle school and high school, the transition plans become a huge part of the IEP. It's a coordinated set of activities that is meant to prepare students with disabilities for what they will do post 12. So what path will they take after they graduate from high school? That's what that transition plan is for. So it focuses on long-term outcomes, depending on which track you're on, which we'll get into in a minute, and vocational training, employment, and independent living. So those are the areas that a transition plan covers. Okay, so before we talk about what type of transition plan is appropriate to create for your child, there are some things that we want to consider. We want to consider, is your child working towards obtaining a high school diploma after or as he or she graduates? Or is your child on a non-diploma track, meaning they are not working toward the general ed state standards that each state has, and they are going to be receiving either a certificate of completion or some type of diploma that is for alternate state standards. So you can only have two tracks as you head into middle and high school. And once you determine what that track is, then you can determine what is best for your child in the transition plan. Another big consideration, and this is very important. As your child nears 18, parents need to start to consider whether that child will need a guardian. So, for example, if you have a child whose disability prevents them from making some big decisions in life, whether they're going to get a job, whether they're going to live completely independently on their own, you should start exploring those guardianship options when the child is still in school, because it does take some time to establish. Um, so if it inhibits their ability to make adult decisions about finances, healthcare, if they should get sick later on in life, residency, where they're going to live, with what type of support, you want to start looking into that sooner rather than later. And of course, once your child's 18, you can't really force them into doing anything, no matter what their disability is. So start to consider those things as your son or daughter heads toward middle school, high school. Start working with your community agencies to figure out where you need to go with guardianship, if anywhere at all. Okay, so these are some of the type of skills that transition plans start to examine for your child and start to evaluate. You need to ask yourself these questions as you head into transition planning for your child. Can they follow multi-step directions? Can they accurately count money and make change? Independently care for themselves? Can they take care of their own hygiene and their own daily living tasks? Know how to get help in a public place. If they should be lost, would they know who to go to? If they're in a store and they need something, would they know how to go get help? Do they have a driver's license? Or do they take public transportation? And are they competent at doing one or the other or both? Um, Use basic kitchen tools, know how to pay bills, basic technology, and good digital citizenship, which is very important. I know schools really focus on that. And do they, most importantly, know how to advocate for him or herself? If they are in a situation where they are confused or they need help, do they know what to do in that situation? So these are some of the things you want to start considering as you start to create those transition plans. And I think, Nora, this is you, right?
Well, yes, this one is me.
This is Nora, our assistant director.
Hi, everyone. So the legal framework for transition plans is in IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, and it requires schools to start planning for students when they reach the age of 16 or earlier in some states. In Illinois, for example, it's 14 and a half. Yeah, in Michigan, it's 16. So check with your in your parent rights handbooks or with your state Department of Education for the state for the date. I'm sorry, for the age of when your child needs to start, they need to start transition planning. So the required transition services, as Ashley indicated, are employment, post-secondary education, and independent living. In employment is, are they going to go into a competitive employment field? Or are they going to need some support? What's that going to look like? Are they going to job shadow first? Are they going to need a job coach for part of that? Post-secondary education can have a variety of looks to it. It could be a 4-year university or a community college, or it could be a vocational training school, or it can be a technical school. Independent living, again, there's a continuum of services. Is your son or daughter going to live with you for the interim while they're being trained for their next step? Or are they going to live in a group home? Or are they going to live in, it's not assisted living, but in an apartment where there's some supervision, but they have roommates with them? So that's the other thing. These are all things that we may take for granted as adults, but these are things that parents have to think about and know for helping their students with those disabilities enter adulthood. So here are some key elements for transition planning and for having a successful transition plan. The first thing is an age-appropriate assessment. Transition assessments should be used to determine a student's skills, needs, and interests. This can look like an interview. It can look like a questionnaire. They can have a self-report from the student and have the parents fill out the same thing of what the parents' dreams and dreams are for their children. We need to have measurable post-secondary goals. It must include specific measurable goals for education, employment, and independent living that link to their education right now. So, and we're going to talk more about SMART goals and how those link. And then there needs to be a coordinated set of activities. And we need to work with the IEP team on the educational level, the parents, the students, and adult agencies, including vocational rehabilitation, Department of Human Services, transition goals, including job training, community experiences, and self-advocacy. So setting the foundation is the transition assessment. As you know, as parents, special education, IEPs are data driven. That doesn't change with a transition plan. So we need to make sure that we have important, valid, reliable assessments done for our students, and they take an active participant. It's not something we do to them, but they have to engage in. And these transition assessments gather the data on their preferences, their interests, their strengths, their needs, and help guide them through post-secondary goals like career exploration. There's, like I said, there's types of assessments, different types. There's interest inventories, there's career exploration tools that are on the computer or on paper, and they gather skills assessments. These results drive the IEP goals, or they should drive the IEP goals. So the assessment results help define measurable and realistic IEP transition goals. It helps to tease out a student's preferences and interests and strengths. Include for the goals of education, employment, and independent living. So, we tell all of our children, hey, dream big, but plan realistically. Post-secondary goals and outcomes are why they are in the special education field now. We want them to have robust and wonderful lives after high school. So categories of the post-secondary goals must have goals linked to again, employment. Everyone wants a job after high school. Further education or training. What does that look like? And independent living, tailored to the student's preferences and abilities. When I was at the high school, my favorite question to ask the kids and the parents is, are you going to live with your parents for the rest of your life? And it was always a resounding no for coming from the parents. Parents wanted those children to live independent lives and fly the nest. Aligning those goals with transition services, again, that's where the coordinated set of activities comes in. Each goal must be supported by specific services outlined in that IEP. And then setting those measurable outcomes. So we're connecting our education with the outcomes. Post-secondary goals should be specific, realistic, and measurable to track a student's progress effectively as they move through the high school years.
Okay. So Nora referred to SMART goals a couple times in the past in her slides. So SMART goals, of course, is an acronym because in special education we have thousands of acronyms. And so the SMART goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Time bound meaning that a child is going to do something in a set period of time. IEPs are annual documents, so most of our goals are annual goals. Um, some school districts do run their IEPs by the school year. Most do not. So most IEP years do not 100% line up with school years. But there is a time limit to the goals and activities that we're assigning to these kids. Um, all right, so I wanted to provide some examples of what we're talking about. So our first example is a student who is on a diploma track. He is going to earn a high school diploma at the end of his 12 years of school. So this is what his transition plan goals could look like. In ninth grade, which is typically when it starts, and again, you want to pay attention to when it starts in your state. IDEA mandates that transition plans have to begin by age 16. Many states, the age is 14. Like Nora said, Illinois is 14 and a half. I'm in Pennsylvania, we're 14. And it goes all the way up to the age of 21. Some states, like the state of Michigan, students can stay in school until 26. So you need to make sure that you're following up with what the regulations are in your state. However, IDEA mandates that 16 is the latest the transition plan should start. So your child may actually have some transition goals in 7th or 8th grade, depending on where you live. So the first one is that Jack will complete at least one career interest inventory with support from the transition coordinator. That's when they're just getting started. What do I want to do? What do I want to study? What do I want to do after high school? A 9th grade goal is going to look very different than a 12th grade goal. And they're going to change every year. Just because in 9th grade someone says they want to be a doctor doesn't mean that in 12th grade they can't all of a sudden say, I don't really want to do that anymore. I would rather be a plumber. They're going to change from year to year. So it's not set in stone. Following the course of how we started, when in 10th grade, Jack will research 3 colleges or universities that have his major of interest. And then in 11th grade, Jack will take the ACT and send results to at least 3 colleges or universities that have mechanical engineering as a major, or whatever the major is that student is interested in. He will explore and apply for at least 3 grants or scholarships available at his schools of choice. And when these are worded in the transition plans, it lists who is responsible for implementing these goals, right? And it typically falls on the transition coordinator or case manager if your school does not have a specific transition coordinator, the family, and the student. So everybody is going to contribute to achieving these goals. And then in 12th grade, Jack will contact accessibility services to determine the necessary documentation needed to continue receiving educational accommodations while in college. While I believe most everyone knows that IEPs do not follow you to college, that does not mean that you cannot get accommodations when you get there. My daughter, for example, had an IEP in high school, and when she got to college, she registered with the Office of Disability Services so that she could receive some accommodations. Now, it's a little bit of a switch. Your child is going to be responsible for getting those accommodations and keeping those accommodations. Parents can't call up the Office of Disability Services for your child in college and kind of set this up for them. So that's why those self-advocacy skills are so important to start teaching as young as possible.
Right.
And then the second part of that goal in 12th grade is to contact a vocational rehabilitation advisor to discuss available services while in college, which includes funding, job placement, and independent living options. For example, you want to contact the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. They offer a wide array of supports and services to students with disabilities. Also, keeping in mind that that does mean students who do go to college. I know a lot of times that we think that OVR is for the students with more significant disabilities or more of those low incidence disabilities, and that is not true. It is very possible that your OVR office can help to fund some things that your child has going on while in college. Sometimes even part of tuition. So it's very important that prior to 12th grade, I would say start getting in contact with OVR around 10th, 11th grade, and establish a file for your child. And that way, when it comes to heading towards graduation, that 11th grade IEP, you want to invite OVR to that IEP and definitely to the 12th grade IEP. So that they are involved as soon as possible in some post 12 services. Okay, so now we have some SMART goals for a non-diploma track. Non-diploma track would be appropriate for a student with more significant disabilities, cognitive disabilities, students who need a modified curriculum. So they're not working toward those general education state standards. So in ninth grade, Jack will, by the end of this IEP, so it's an IEP year, Jack will count money and make correct change when given a set amount of money and purchase price with 90% accuracy in 8 out of 10 trials. So again, something tangible, something that is a skill that perhaps they will need as they're heading into either supported employment or independent employment. In 10th grade, before meeting with the district job coach in May of 2025, Jack will appropriately use first, then last repetition strategies when given 3-step directions in 8 out of 10 trials. So again, can they follow multi-step directions in any given task? And this is appropriate for any place of employment and any type of task. So this is something that we can start working on in the transition plan. 11th grade, with support, Jack will select and follow a basic 5-step or less recipe to prepare lunch once each month for his life skills class. So here we have some of those independent living skills along with those multi-step directions. So we're kind of combining the skills that we want them to learn with the tasks that they need to get there. He will complete all measuring, food prep, cooking, cleanup with 90% accuracy as measured by the DIY food prep checklist. And then in 12th grade, with or without support, Jack will complete at least 3 job applications and interview for at least 2 job opportunities. And again, this is something that your transition department, your transition plan of your IEP can absolutely assist with. However, keep in mind that there's always typically 3 groups of people assigned to master these goals: the student, the transition coordinator, special ed department, case manager, whatever the case may be, and the parents. So kind of everybody is working together to help the students achieve these goals. Okay. So once you have your goals set, it's important to coordinate some activities that are going to help your son or daughter reach those goals. So job training, community involvement, self-advocacy development. So under the goals, you're going to have a list of coordinated activities. That's what they're called. So in order to follow a multi-step direction, as you saw in the one goal, the task was to follow a recipe and to cook a meal. So you want to make sure that those tasks are relating to the specific transition goals. And further, you also want to make sure that those are linking to the annual goals that are also part of the IEP. Especially as the student gets older, it's important that everything starts to kind of become cohesive. And those individualized goals that they are working on in academics should absolutely reflect what their transition goals are as well. So just for example of some types of coordinated activities: job shadowing, internships, life skills classes like the cooking, or many schools also have classes where they teach children how to do laundry and fold clothes. I wish they could come to my house and teach some people that live under my roof how to do that. And community participation. And those are some key activities to foster that independence in your child, and to get them ready for what that next step is. I forget, Nora, is this you or me?
Sure, I'll do it.
It's Nora.
It's me. So in piggybacking with what Ashley said, there's collaboration with community resources. Everything is a collaborative effort. So usually offered by the local school district is young adult programming, also followed by vocational rehabilitation, or it's DHH or DHS. Local college university accessibility services and case managers. SSD and SSI for those students who are significantly impacted who cannot work, or who need financial support. So there's an example in the state of Michigan, which is on the next slide. And that is, so the school districts in Michigan, they partner with the Office of Voc Rehab who partners with Michigan Works. And then they all coordinate together to ensure that students with disabilities have opportunities to get employment.
And Michigan Works is a group that does provide resources and support for children with disabilities as they head on to post-12 activity. It's a really nice advantage that the state of Michigan has, that they start that partnership as early as high school. So if any of the attendees out there are in the state of Michigan, keep your eyes and ears open for that partnership between the school, OVR, and Michigan Works. It's a super nice program that they have in that state.
So parent and student involvement. This is tantamount to successful outcomes for your child. First of all, the student has to be engaged in making their own decisions at this point. At the age of 14 and a half in Illinois, we always invited our students to come to the IEP meeting. Some students didn't like doing that. They felt very intimidated. However, we needed to get their input on their preferences, their goals, their dreams on that transition plan. So having them at that IEP meeting just for that part is very beneficial for a student. And then it helps them practice in an organic way how to self-advocate and communicate. And that's how they help when they're working on their transition plan. And like I said, they give their input on goals, preferences, and interests, because their transition plan is theirs. It's not mine. It's not yours, mom and dad. It's theirs. And so we need to have their input. Parents, you are the expert of your child. You know your child better than any one of us sitting around that table. And your voice is the loudest voice at that table. And so your advocacy is imperative. Learning and knowing about what the transition plan is crucial to having successful goals and outcomes after graduation.
And one thing I just wanted, I'm sorry, Nora.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, one thing I wanted to add is that while when the transition age hits, whether it's 14 and a half, 16, depending on where you live, schools are required to start inviting your son or daughter to their IEP meetings. So granted, a lot of kids are a little bit shy about it and, don't really want to come. My daughter was identified in 4th grade. She started attending her IEP meetings from day one. I had her there day one so that she knew what the IEP was, what it was for. And by the time we got to transition age, she was super comfortable with advocating for herself, being a part of her transition plan, and just being involved from day one, really. Right. And again, that's an individual, family-based decision. But it is your choice, really. You can, even though before the age of 14, you can absolutely say, I want my child to be at the meeting.
Right.
But after the age of 14 or 16, they have to be at least invited. If it's too overwhelming for them, IEP teams understand that. But it is nice. It's nice for them to be involved in the process.
Absolutely. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Let's go back to that. So, that last slide,
Oh, I
collaboration
don't know
is,
how. Oh, here.
that's okay.
Sorry.
Collaboration is important between the IEP team, the parents, and the students. That is the main thread. That's the main theme through this entire presentation today, is it's got to be a collaborative effort between all three of those. So it's that the transition plan is tailored to those students' strengths and future goals. All right, sorry about that, Ashley.
That's okay.
So there are some common challenges with implementing an IEP. First, it's usually the lack of school resources, a delayed in assessments or services, and inadequate goal setting. So the lack of schools resources, like Ashley said, it could be the special ed case manager, it could be a transition specialist. But if you don't have a transition specialist, that case manager is now wearing two hats. But it's okay because sometimes it's not okay because it's limiting the quality and the quantity of those services available for transition planning. Delayed assessments. Sometimes school districts don't have those assessments. Sometimes they don't know what the rules are for IDEA. However, that can lead to some gaps in programming and support for our students. So those are really important. And then inadequate goal setting. Vague and or unrealistic post-secondary goals can hinder the effectiveness of a transition plan. So parents, my key takeaway from this should be read those goals. Think about how those goals are going to connect to those future outcomes and to their post-secondary outcomes.
Right.
So here's what a successful transition plan should look like. It should include everything in that Venn diagram, the community professionals, the school personnel, the family, and that student right in the center of that Venn diagram. And the student profile is, she's a 17-year-old student with autism transitioning to supported employment. Her services include vocational training, some job coaching, some community integration activities, were all implemented in order for her to have those successful outcomes. With these coordinated efforts, the school and vocational agencies, the student secured a job and develop essential life skills. Those are skills that she can take throughout her life.
Right. Okay, so what can parents do? What should parents be doing? Of course, attending IEP meetings at least annually. And as you should know, parents can request an IEP meeting at any time. So you want to make sure as your child reaches transition age that you are frequently reviewing their child's transition plan and their IEP to make sure they align with your child's changing goals. Like I said, some people in ninth grade, they want to be a doctor, and then they find out that, the next one of those coordinated activities should be to look up what is required to study to become a doctor. And then they find out that, that we have to take biology, chemistry, we have to see blood every day. Well, yeah, that's part of being a doctor. So the next thing they know, they don't want to be a doctor anymore. So that transition plan is going to change along with their interests and along with what they as they find themselves through high school. And engage with those local agencies. It is never too early once your child reaches transition age. Office of Vocational Rehabilitation is a big one. Sometimes it's called different things in different states. It can be Department of Human Services, but it's typically some type of Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. And again, it's never too soon. A lot of OVR agencies will not attend IEP meetings until the student is graduating or reaches the age 17 or 18. It just depends on your state. Some will get involved as your child is younger. They'll at least open a file on them. And so just reach out and they'll let you know what the steps are. Okay, should you need help, you can absolutely schedule a consultation with Kay Altman Law. We have a wealth of knowledge in the field of special education and in transition planning, so we are absolutely happy to help. We can help address your issues through advocacy. If we have to, we can take legal action, but we actually pride ourselves in not having to do that very often. We find that when our advocates work with the school districts, we really do secure a favorable outcome for your child without having to get any of our attorneys involved. Um, we ensure that schools do meet the legal obligations to implement effective transition plans and provide support if necessary. I have attended IEP meetings where I have completely rewritten transition plans for school teams, and they were grateful because they were, just unsure. Sometimes, transition may not be their strength. So we can absolutely help you with that. And here is our number that you can reach us if you would like to schedule a consultation. And we would like to thank you for joining us. And we're going to get to questions in a minute. But I wanted to highlight the promo code that if you do call in for a consultation, you will get a discount for having viewed our webinar. So now I'm going to take some time to pause and see if there are any questions anywhere.
Hey, Ashley, we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So, hi, everybody. My name's Bobby. I'm going to just go over some of the questions that we already have. And if you have another one while we're going through these, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and Sarah will post them as we're reading through them. So one of the questions that was posed is, going back to the beginning, is what happens when I disagree with the school? Like this example was, they're not allowing the child into the mainstream classes in order for her to get a regular diploma. So what happens when the school has chosen something, a path that the parents don't agree with?
Good question.
Sure, that's a great question. And I have seen that. Not frequently, but I have seen that a few times. And that's tough, right? Because the first thing that I would suggest is go back to the data. What is the data showing? What is the data showing that for your child as an area of strength and the areas of need? So take a look at that. If you have a situation where, so you're kind of asking about two different things, right? Because you're asking about more time in gen ed and then potentially also leading to a disagreement with the transition plan. Inclusion is the best environment for students of disabilities to learn in. And I absolutely think that students with disabilities need to be with their typical peers to the maximum extent possible. That being said, if you are talking about a child who has, and say, an IQ of 60, and they say they want to go to medical school. Understood. It's very tough as a school team because you don't want to squash those dreams of a child. However, as the years go on, you want to get more realistic. So while you may not be able to be a doctor, let's talk about other things that you can do in the medical field that would help you to feel like you are a part of that field and you can be successful. So it's a tough call, but remember, these are team decisions. So even if the school and the parents are at two opposite ends of the spectrum, eventually a common ground is going to have to be found. The best way to do that is to look at the data for your child and make those decisions with your child regarding what they can do in their next steps.
Thank you, Ashley. So we have another parent who's explaining that they had to give up FAPE for their child this year, and he's being homeschooled. He is on the John Peterson scholarship, so he's going to a school that provider for that school, and they are providing general education. What her question is who's responsible for the transition plan in the IEP, since that is a private sector, and is the transition plan still is legally binding as other parts of the IEP, like the goals.
Okay, so let me just clarify. The student is currently homeschooled or is currently in a private school?
Well, he's homeschooled and goes to a JP scholarship provider for school. They are also providing general education. The parents are paying tuition. So I imagine that because it's private school, that maybe the IEP is listed as homeschooled. She said she gave up faith this year. So,
Gotcha.
Okay, I'll let you answer that.
I think I understand. So a couple of different things. If you choose to homeschool your child, then obviously your home district is not responsible for implementing an IEP. That being said, if you do homeschool your child and your child receives related services, OT, PT, speech, you can absolutely get those related services for your child, even if you are homeschooling them. I'll speak to the private piece for a minute because I'm unsure if this means that the student is receiving general education virtually, and that is where the private piece comes in. As a whole, private schools are not mandated to implement IEPs because they do not receive IDEA funding for IEPs. Many private schools will accept students who have IEPs, no problem. But they typically make it very clear that they do not implement and they do not provide the same level of support that a public school district would be mandated to provide. So depending on the situation, and I'm still not really sure I understand fully, but if it is a private school, they are not mandated to implement that document or the services. However, if you're talking school of choice, it might be something different. But I'm not sure if I answered that question appropriately, but two different things. Homeschool, definitely the district is not responsible for implementing it. Same with a private school, but some private schools will. It just depends on whether that private school has a special education department. Most do not.
Ashley, can you explain for the audience maybe how dual enrollment may combine that?
Sure. So if you are a parent who has chosen to send your child to private school, which is absolutely your choice, you can receive some special education services through dual enrollment. Now this varies from state to state. You have to confirm with your state that they do allow for dual enrollment. I'm in Pennsylvania. We do, meaning that exactly what it sounds. Your child is dually enrolled in a private school and in their home district. So that means that while the school day, the student is in a private school, they, after school hours or before school hours, however it works out with the schedule, they can receive those related services, speech, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. But the caveat is they have to be dually enrolled in both.
I'm sorry, Ashley, did you get
It's okay.
to comment if the transition plan is as legally binding as any other part of the IEP, such as goals?
Oh, yes. No, I did not get to that. Yes, they are. So the transition plan is part of the IEP, and especially when the plan is first implemented or first created, um, the student is expected to make progress, right? Just like they would be on their IEP goals. So if we've got a transition plan in place for a child who has every intention of going to college. They're on a diploma track, they're going to apply for college, and we have a transition goal of, say, Jane is going to enter full-time employment at the, I don't know, YMCA after school, whatever. That doesn't really align with what she wants to do right after high school. So you do have to, yes, you do have to make sure that those are aligned. And the transition plan is just as legally binding as the IEP. Now I say that with a caveat that, if not every transition goal is met 100%, then we can't really go back to the school and say, oh, well, Johnny got into Penn State University. He didn't get into University of Pennsylvania. It said in the transition plan that he wanted to go to the University of Pennsylvania. That's not what that means. That means that those goals and activities are created to get him closest to his goal, that is that, that an IEP team can do.
Thanks, Ashley. We did have an audience member who just wanted to share some of her knowledge that she just pointed out that it's really important to look into alternatives to the guardianship, because in some cases a rep payee or power of attorney will address only certain concerns. She was referencing supported decision-making agreement that is used in her state of Maine. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to be able to add or elaborate, you or Nora, on that topic.
No, I mean, of course, as with everything, it does vary state to state. So you want to refer to your state guidelines and regulations as you head into making those decisions. But yes, no, that is a good point. You want to make sure that what it is that you need in regards to guardianship for your child, refer to your state specific guidelines for that.
And just to piggyback off of that, I know in the state of Illinois, there's a certain time frame to do certain things. So at the age of 16, you have to apply for voc rehab, or at 17, you have to do this, or a trust has to be established. So those are very important, and you can get that information on the web. Again, going to the State Department of the Department of Education, or any kind of like Social Security Administration, that will help you with being able to set up that guardianship, those trusts, and those other things for students moving into adulthood.
Right.
Thanks. Okay, so the next question is, would the transition plan need to address all three transition areas that were identified, the independent living, the education, and employment, or does it only have to do one or two? Mom makes a statement that she feels like it's an afterthought in her child's plan, and it's not always as detailed as what we're describing.
So that's a really good question. And typically, you want to have definitely the post-secondary goal, and then the training, the employment goal, the employment in the post-secondary. Not all students need an independent living goal. So that sometimes is not addressed in a transition plan. If you've got a student who, at 11th, 12th grade, they've applied to their colleges, they've been accepted, they know where they're going, they've held a job all through high school, they may not need that independent living piece. So that is one part that is up to the IEP team. Is this something that needs to be addressed in the transition plan? However, the employment and the post-secondary both should definitely be active in the transition plan.
Okay, and as we're talking about it's just the inventories. Are there other inventories that you maybe can recommend other than the ESTR, which is the Enderle-Severson Transition Rating Scale? And we do have a list of some others. As Rebecca pointed out earlier, there will be a pack that goes out with the seminar. But if you don't have one that either of you two ladies have experienced and would like to recommend, we do have some that we have available to us in a list that we can add. But what is your experience other than the ESTR?
Do you want to start, Nora? I mean, I've used it's kind of funny that you asked that, because there are many interest
Yeah.
inventories. And that one I've actually never heard of, but I know that school districts in my area, there's actually an interest inventory that is provided by OSHA, which is the government standards for safety in on the job site and in work sites. And they have a very comprehensive career interest inventory. So that is one that we have had students access on the government website. As for some additional specific ones, of course, I'm not going to be able to pull them off the top of my head right now. Nora, do you know any specific ones?
So we used one called Career Builder in Illinois, and
Yes.
all the
Yep.
students took it. It was on the computer. We had an advisory built into the school day. So all of our students, including our students with the most significant disabilities,
Yep.
participated in that as part of the general ed curriculum. So that was always in the morning, one day a week. So they started with that interest inventory. There's also some some other ones called, what was the one? I just Googled it because I had to remember. The pictorial and descriptive interest inventory. And then there's some that are non-reading. So some for our significant students
Right.
or our cognitive intellectual disability students. There's some that are they look pretty elementary, so to speak, but they're pictorial, and it still is able to get that point across of what their interests and goals are.
And we will provide a list. We're going to send out an email after the webinar with a few resources, and that will definitely be on there. Some additional inventories for you guys to look up.
So we did have, you talked about the mom that was talking about her child that is doing the John Peterson scholarship, but in private schools altogether, are they required to do a transition plan for kids with special needs, or is it only for kids with an IEP?
Well, that's kind of two different things. So are they required to do a transition plan? Depending, it depends. Private schools can do something called a transition plan. Doesn't mean that it's part of an IEP. So there are private schools who will work with students to kind of get to the same place that a transition plan gets you when you do have an IEP. But if you are asking about a transition plan that is part of an IEP, again, private schools are not mandated to implement IEPs, so they would not be mandated to implement a transition plan because they do not get that federal funding. Does that mean that they're on their own? No, most private schools will do something in way of a transition plan.
And there's
do a
no
lot of
eligibility. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say, there's no eligibility that's not going to do that. So if you have a child that, we kind of talked about some of the kids that had a little bit more extensive disabilities, but like a student with other health impairment for ADHD or a student with a specific learning disability, they too would go through that transition plan process starting at the ages that you talked about.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
And those are just going to look different from like your OHI, like you said, Bobby, to the cognitive disabilities. It's going to look different. The key to that is collaboration between parents, students, the IEP team, and those adult services.
Yep. Any other questions?
I'm just double checking because a couple did come in while we were answering questions. So I want to make sure that I caught everybody's. Although there is a parent or audience member who did just note that in Michigan, if you register as a homeschool with the state, then a parent can take their child to the ancillary service. She's just providing that. And then we do have a professor that he actually is out there in the secondary world, and he's a professor in special education. So thank you for getting those people ready for the next generation.
Thank you.
That he's just saying thank you, and that we are providing some great points that he wants to be able to include, and is asking for resources. So, sir, you will, or ma'am, you will be entitled to the resources that are going to go out as well.
Correct.
But
Absolutely,
I
thank you.
think I'm double checking. Nothing's popping up last minute. I'm just kind of giving it a sec. But I don't see anything else that is coming through. If you want to, well, you've already kept it up here all this time for the promo code.
Yep,
If
absolutely.
they do come up with anything more, I mean, they can always reach out and answer,
Yes.
ask questions, and we can try to respond. I don't know
Yep,
how long the meeting
absolutely.
chat stays up.
Okay, if there are no more questions, and this was actually perfect because we're almost at the 1 hour mark. I just want to thank you for your time and for joining us. And we hope that the information was helpful. And just keep in mind that just like the IEP, the transition plan is also individualized. And it is meant to meet the specific needs of your child. And we hope we empowered you a little bit with some information that you can then take back to your IEP teams. Okay. Everybody have a great night.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks again.
Bye, everyone.